So I want to welcome you all to the the fifth forum on the Belt and Road Initiative that the Joint Chamber of Commerce Switzerland, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the South Caucasus, and the Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce are organizing together. My name is Dorit Salas. I'm the Managing Director of the Joint Chamber of Commerce. I will be your moderator today. Just a couple of words about us. The Joint Chamber of Commerce is the leading private sector chamber of commerce in Switzerland that facilitates bilateral business between Switzerland and the countries of Eastern Europe, non-EU countries, that is, Central Asia and the South Caucasus. JCC is the central unifying hub for all these countries' business activity in Switzerland and the bridge to the region for Swiss firms wishing to export and invest in these markets. For JCC, the Belt and Road Initiative is of central importance because it runs squarely through the regions which we represent, Central Asia and the South Caucasus. Now, the advent of the COVID pandemic has not only upended our lives, but also has implications for the BRI project. Concretely, the outbreak has led to disruptions in BRI projects, which often depend heavily on labor and supplies, which are prevented from reaching the sites as a result of the lockdowns. Several BRI projects, such as those in Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan, have been stalled by lockdowns. On an economic level, many countries under the BRI initiative have borrowed quite heavily from China to invest in new projects. But the pandemic, of course, is disrupting those economies and will complicate repayment plans. Currently, low-income countries are asking China for debt relief. And the third aspect is the impact of COVID on globalization in general and on traditional arteries of FDI and trade, as well as the way firms operate. Many European companies will be redirecting investment into reshoring, nearshoring, and stockpiling. There could also be a diversification of supply chains away from a single country. And traditionally, China has been the country that has been a lead, the key manufacturer of the world. So this may change. We are looking forward to hearing about these issues and much more from our esteemed speakers. I would like to thank Bei Lun Wei for being an excellent partner as the director of the Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce and coming to our rescue technically today. And I would like to thank Switzerland Global Enterprise for sponsoring this event and for its ongoing and unflagging support. And now I would like to give the floor to Marcel Pavlicek, CEO of Burkhardt Compression and President of the Joint Chamber of Commerce, to say a couple of words of welcome.
Thank you very much, Dorit. Welcome everybody to this, what you mentioned, the fifth conference we are having on the Belt Road Initiative. I still remember when we had the first one 5 years ago, nobody in Switzerland had a clue about the Belt Road Initiative from the Chinese government. So everybody was sitting in Bern looking at us, what the hell are they talking about? I think recently the whole Belt Road Initiative is in everybody's mouth. People have realized what we are talking about. Of course, as Dorit mentioned, there is some setbacks because of this Corona crisis. Nevertheless, we all know that these projects ultimately will go on and will go further. And I personally have been involved already in projects in Central Asia, which have been financed by also China. And I'm looking really forward for further projects. And I'm really happy to have this meeting this afternoon together with the Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce. And together we have already held this seminar, I think 3 or 4 times, quite successfully. And it's always quite interesting to hear what's going on. Also from my side, my apology for the technical challenges, but that happens. And I think Corona has one good thing. It pushes us to go more digital. And it pushes us to try out the latest technologies. And I think that also helps. Unfortunately, we cannot travel right now That's a little bit the unfortunate part. I'm trying desperately to go to China right now, which they cancel all the time my flights over there. But one day I'm sure we will go over there again. With this, I would like to hand over to my colleague, the president of the Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce, to Felix Sutto, also for a short welcome note. And thank you very much for participating this afternoon.
Thank you, Marcel. Dear members and friends of the Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce and the Joint Chamber of Commerce, I also warmly welcome you from my side as the president of the Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce. My name is Felix Sutter. For 22 years, I am exposed to Chinese culture. For the past 20 years, I'm involved in bridging economic ties between China and Europe, especially Switzerland. As a partner with PwC, I was based 5 years in China and worked mostly with SOEs and Chinese citizens across all of mainland China and Hong Kong. Today, I'm based in Switzerland and work with my Chinese partners to maintain and increase the economic ties. My passion lies in coaching entrepreneurs and leaders interested in Europe and China, to be that at CIBS or individually. We have been partnering with the Joint Chamber of Commerce on the new Silk Road Forum for the 4th year. We are happy to be part of that annual flagship event, especially on a topic that originates in China. Here, I would like to thank you very much to Dorit and Marcel for organizing this year's event. We continue to be in an unusual year. We have the COVID-19 virus that has interrupted all of our plans for the year, as Marcel just said. It seems to last until at least mid-2022 to get back to some way of normalcy. We are all affected by the ongoing trade conflict between China and the US. China has updated its list of items that cannot be exported from China or need permission to do so. These restrictions are valid for all countries around the globe. For the Swiss economy, these restrictions in the life science, MEM, and IoT sectors are of most concern to us. The past few weeks have seen negotiations and virtual meetings on the highest level between the EU and the Chinese government. Topics were raised in the official agenda that were in the past discussed on the sidelines. Now they became center stage. How are European companies viewed, involved, or getting involved in BRI initiatives? We can expect the media to cast light on terms and conditions, as well as on the type of projects to be involved. Therefore, it's important to maintain the same corporate values and principles at home as well as overseas. This simple measure will strengthen BRI projects and achieve what is the foremost aim: to build infrastructure in places where they do not exist yet or are inadequate, therefore strengthening the economic ties and further eliminate poverty through economic activities. And if you, as Marcel, want to travel physically to China, restrictions there also apply. The borders in China are still closed. Only a few categories of residence permit holders are allowed to enter China, with a requirement to undergo tests and a 14-day quarantine. Under these circumstances, what additional opportunities are out there along the Belt and Road initiatives for our businesses? It is not just about infrastructure projects that are listed and open for application. It's, as President Xi Jinping mentioned, there are 5 pillars of the BRI in his historic speech at the Kazakhstan Nazarbayev University. It also addresses, among other topics, the facilitation of trade, enhancement of monetary circulation along the BRI countries. Here today's program will give us a wide range of inputs from various countries. Switzerland and China signed an MOU on BRI on April 29, 2019, and have established, among other activities, a BRI competence building platform. Thanks to the long-year positive bilateral relations with the 2 countries, Swiss companies may especially benefit more from BRI business opportunities therefore. Mr. Tony Moret will tell you more about that. With further ado, I hand back to Dorit. Thank you, listeners, for your time and interest to be here with us. I look very much forward to the various input talks this afternoon. Back to you, Dorit.
Thank you so much, Felix, for that very uplifting introduction. Yes, we very much appreciate the fact that we can partner with the Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce. It's almost like a no-brainer. I mean, this is our region, and I think if we bundle our forces, it makes us more effective in bringing information and opportunities to companies. We will start today's program with a presentation by Dr. Benno Zog. He's senior researcher for the Center for Security Studies at ETH Zurich. And he's going to give us an overview of the Belt and Road Initiative, looking at China's pivot to Eurasia and the impact of COVID-19. The floor is yours, Benno.
Thank you very much, Dorit. Thank you to all the organizers for making this possible and for the invitation. Let me start right away. I mean, you and the audience have all dealt with aspects of the Belt and Road for sure. You've seen the grand rhetoric at a political level, and you may have witnessed or were involved in many on-the-ground projects in Eurasia, in China, in Switzerland or elsewhere. At the same time, you may still struggle with the same issues as I as a researcher or the research community more generally. How to capture the Belt and Road Initiative, how to conceptualize it, how to grasp where it starts and where it ends. However much we've heard about the Belt and Road, these questions are still not trivial. And the ways we answer these questions also inform us how the pandemic affects the Belt and Road in Eurasia, after all. We have all seen these maps, these impressive maps of the Belt and Road, and usually they're accompanied by further impressive numbers, for example, about the scope of $1 to $3 trillion of the whole endeavor. The Belt and Road is certainly assumed to change the face of the earth, but perceptions of what that may look like differ widely. There's assumptions from a connected common zone of prosperity to a China-dominated neo-colonial world. We've heard it all. And since the pandemic, perceptions have only diverged further, I would argue. Part of the problem is that the Belt and Road is inherently broad and vague. I remember one researcher comparing it to an artichoke. It has many leaves, it has many layers, but everything is somehow connected to a heart. In my opinion, the Belt and Road cannot be separated from Chinese foreign policy overall. And also these many leaves of the artichoke make centralizing and coordinating the Belt and Road very difficult. So it has these economic, political, even geopolitical, security and cultural dimensions. Eurasia, I would argue, is particularly interesting with regard to the Belt and Road, as this space is connecting China and Europe, and it has been an early and strong focus on the Belt and Road. However, the Belt and Road changes with the pandemic. Eurasia is a region that China will not be able to afford to abandon. I would argue that the Belt and Road in Eurasia is tangible. These are photos of my own field research last year. On the top left, we see Dordoy Bazaar in Kyrgyzstan, where Chinese merchandise, but also Chinese traders are ever more present in Central Asia. On the right, we see the main road between central and eastern Kyrgyzstan. For decades, it's been a project that's existed in plans. Within a couple of years, Chinese companies built it with Chinese money. And on the bottom, we see Nazarbayev University in Nur-Sultan, Kazakhstan, which is the place where in 2013, the Belt and Road was announced in the first place. I'm sure you all have very similar images in mind when picturing the Belt and Road. What does China want in Eurasia in the first place? It is mostly, in the end, about domestic Chinese politics and economics. It's about better access to resources, to trade routes, and all of that for China's hinterland in particular. To that end, some states in Eurasia are strategically important, for example, Russia and Kazakhstan, about which we'll hear later, whereas others are more important and others less. Eventually, investments in Eurasia and making Eurasia part of Chinese-led supply chains should help secure China's borders and push its economic growth, especially Xinjiang's economic growth. In Xinjiang, Beijing tries to pursue stability through economic development, but also through repression. Investment in Eurasia overall comes at no surprise. The infrastructure and investment gap in the region is widely acknowledged. So it is a space where other powers and investors are not too present, and where China may have a freer hand to invest, to gain market shares, but also to push its standards. Let's zoom in a little bit. On this map of Eurasia, we see the classic Belt and Road as we imagine it. We see pipelines, we see railroads, roads, but also sectors less prominently known like power generation or industry. Many of these projects that are mapped here predate the announcement of the Belt and Road, while many other projects have been announced but are very slow to materialize. I'm sure many of you have made experiences with that. Some very important economic aspects are not visible on a map, which is why all these maps of the Belt and Road can be misleading at times, because the component of standards and of technology is very important as well. We're aware that Chinese companies are leading in telecommunication, including 5G. Huawei, for example, is building Russia's 5G network, but it's also involved in projects for smart cities in places like Kyrgyzstan. Overall, most projects are executed by Chinese companies that are labeled as Belt and Road, and they're mostly financed by Chinese loans, in Eurasia most notably by the Exim Bank and China Development Bank. Chinese private banks, or the AIIB, for example, are less present. Furthermore, I would argue that we often speak of investments, which can be a bit misleading because many of these are actually loans, which have a different logic, of course. In the region, though, China is certainly perceived as the one actor providing most money with least strings attached. And it thus also carries the strongest promise of economic transformation in Eurasia. But still, let's not forget, China does not act in isolation in Eurasia. It's often overlooked that there's other states, there's multilateral development banks that are active too, and some Eurasian states fund Belt and Road projects themselves. In their own development projects, after all, Eurasian states hope not just to be transit or resource suppliers, but to capture higher sections of the value chain. And there's two examples for that on the map, on two ends of the Belt and Road, if you will. There's Khorgos at the border of Kazakhstan and China, which is a container dry port as well for railroads. And at the other end of the belt, the number one here on the map is the Great Stone Industrial Park outside of Minsk, Belarus. Both these projects are pushed by local governments and have logistics at their heart, but it's also about manufacturing in the end, high technology manufacturing in particular. Some very few companies, though, have located there, mainly Chinese ones. There's still much room for more to fulfill the hopes of these countries. One aspect is certain, that trade with China, here depicted in red as a share of these countries' imports and exports, has massively increased in the past decades. China has become an important trade partner for most Eurasian states, even though Russia and the EU, as we see here in green and in blue, still have impressive shares. We mustn't forget that. Importantly, what we cannot see here is that trade between Eurasian states has also increased. And this hints at another dimension of Chinese influence that is very important, which is trade promotion. Railways are nice to have, but if goods are stuck for days at each border crossing because of paperwork, railways are worth very little. The World Bank has, though, already assessed that the Belt and Road has had an effect on trade facilitation in the region. Several frameworks within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for example, have led to impressive agreements on border management, on customs procedures, on standards in traffic and transport. This already emphasizes, particularly for me as a political scientist, that politics matter for the Belt and Road, certainly not just about physical infrastructure. Particularly in Eurasia, as opposed to other regions, institutions are important as well, which we see a pattern here. China often has a very bilateral approach to countries, but in Eurasia, it's testing multilateral formats as well. We're all aware of the AIIB or the SCO as important examples. So China's increasing economic clout is also translating into institutions and such formats, which is particularly at the expense of Russia to some extent. And actually on Russia, China and Russia are celebrating their friendship on the international stage. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin seem to get along really well. Here they're even cooking together. This is the official propaganda that they want us to see. The two countries need each other because there's an increasing issue with other actors. So Russia, to some extent, can substitute for Western sanctions with Chinese capital and technology. But there's inherent tensions between the two as well, partially because Russia has its own institutions, the Eurasian Economic Union, namely. However, both appear committed to harmonize their initiatives. It's not fully clear what that means. It hasn't led to a free trade zone between the two, for example, but the framing itself shows that China is willing to take Russian sensitivities into account, which is important given Russia has enormous influence still in the region. So far, I've mostly discussed the economic and intergovernmental aspects. At the societal level, different realities are present, with ramifications for the business world as well. Many Belt and Road projects, however they are framed or financed, are seen on the ground as Chinese projects. And China is met with a lot of skepticism in many places in Eurasia. I myself spent about a month last year on field research in Central Asia, and very few people I talked to spoke positively about China. There's a big cultural gap, there's a lack of mutual understanding, there's very tangible fears as well of the loss of land, of jobs, and a lot of worry about how China treats Muslims, for example, which creates a certain dissonance. So governments speak of friendship with China, while the population is often distrustful. China is quite aware about this skepticism, so it's tried to promote its language, its culture, and thus also a better image of China. That's through student exchanges, Confucius Institutes, the media as well. The results of this we may only see in a generation or two. This leads to the main part of this forum, which is the influence of the pandemic. Overall, it's still fairly tricky to talk about the influence of the pandemic because it's after all still ongoing. And the opaque nature of many Belt and Road loans and contracts make an assessment even harder, I would argue. In the short term, there's certainly been quite some influence, as we heard earlier as well. Borders were closed, so contractors and workers could not travel. There were some outbreaks in resource extraction areas, for example, which disrupted supplies. Projects were stalled. We've seen in Central Asia, in particular, masked diplomacy on behalf of China, so helping out with medical equipment to countries in need. After all, many countries in Eurasia were pretty badly hit by the pandemic, namely Russia, Kazakhstan, or Belarus. A survey released by the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs said that 20% of Belt and Road projects were, quote, severely hit by the pandemic, and half of the remaining projects were affected somewhat as well. Apparently, some numbers indicate that around 5% lower value of construction contracts were signed in the framework of the Belt and Road overall in the first half of 2020. We'll see how that develops in the long run. The effects of the pandemic certainly pose a fundamental challenge to many Eurasian states, as economics are in recession, resource prices are down, and some states have very specifically called for debt relief already. Allegedly, China's Exim Bank granted Kyrgyzstan that. It restructured loans worth around $1.7 billion. We shall furthermore see that if Chinese lenders claim resources for collateralized loans. That's what many are afraid of. At the same time, we've also seen surprising effects of the pandemic. Imports from Russia and Kazakhstan to China have actually increased at times earlier this year, which de facto means that there were less oil imports from the Middle East and more from Eurasia. Also, train connections have vastly increased this year because at the same time, shipping overseas and air travel have become way less reliable and more expensive. So competitive advantage of trains were actually shown by the pandemic. And this also proves that China keeps relying on Eurasia. So while China is currently recovering ahead of other states, and that includes Eurasia or Europe, we may see its economic footprint in Eurasia as opposed to other powers only growing even more so. This in turn means that Eurasian states may increasingly rely on China when they seek investments or economic opportunities, and maybe even for political support. Meanwhile, balancing major powers and diversifying partners, which is very important to many Eurasian states, may become more difficult, given global tensions, but also Russia's weakness. At the same time, though, as supply chains may get reevaluated globally and relocated out of China partially, this could also be an opportunity for Eurasia. So tensions usually have both sides to it. Certainly, technology is an important factor and a Chinese strength as well, and may increase as a factor further. This includes telecom giants like Huawei, but also Alibaba or Tencent, which may make inroads in e-commerce. The involvement of this so-called digital Silk Road is likely accelerated by the pandemic, as far as we can tell. And this more and more Chinese technology will also bring about more Chinese standards, another factor to watch out for. So to sum this up, the Belt and Road Initiative will continue because it is flexible. And the fundamental rationale behind it remains as well. China needs to maintain its growth, it needs to reduce excess capacities, it needs to diversify supplies and trade routes. The fundamental issues that are present remain as well, such as China's domestic debt problem, but also pollution. We may probably see a Belt and Road with a smaller budget in the medium term. We see more focused projects, a process that has already started before the pandemic. And now, even more so, Chinese government will probably prioritize spending domestically over sending capital abroad. So we may see effects of that. The Belt and Road has a history of many projects that were announced and only few were actually implemented. This may increase as many projects may not materialize because the economic realities have changed. So some loans and projects will be restructured rather than new ones being approved. Maybe that offers an opportunity for sustainability though, as China has a genuine interest in sustainable projects that are beneficial in the long run and critically do not create local backlash as well. So we will see how China is able to adapt, how it's incorporating feedback from past experiences as well to influence future projects. After all, the Belt and Road as a label is still very young. We're still in the process of its evolution. As the pandemic may increase instability in the region and may lead to crises as well, we could point at Belarus, for example, being a first indicator of that. We can wonder, what if leaders in countries closer to China than Belarus are threatened? What if Chinese assets are under threat? We know that China already has a lot of leverage to act in such situations. So we will see how China acts on that if instability indeed increases over the course of the pandemic. One very general statement is very clear, that the ways China acts in Eurasia will certainly continue to inform us about China's behavior and its priorities more globally. That's also why I think not just people caring about Eurasia should care about the Belt and Road in Eurasia, but people way more broadly. I shall leave it at that with a look at the time. Thank you very much for the floor.
Thank you so much, Benno. You covered a lot of ground. I have many questions, many questions. We do have a time constraint, but let me just put one question out there, and then I encourage the viewers to write their questions in the chat function, and whatever we can't discuss in today's webinar, we can discuss via email. You mentioned the Eurasian Economic Union, which is a very big Russian project. And my question has always been, how specifically has this fit into the overall BRI strategy and framework? I wonder if you could say a couple of words on that.
Certainly, yes. I think it's a really important factor. I fully agree on that. And I think there's been two sides to it. One is the very specific side. If we look at these visions, let's say they're competing visions in a way, specifically, and there's been the issue raised that the Belt and Road is very vague, it's not institutionalized, it's open for anyone to participate, it doesn't have clear goals or rules, whereas the Eurasian Economic Union, in a way, is almost the opposite. It's rather exclusionary. It's trying to build borders around it through tariffs, for example. And it's kind of a political project as well that is very much perceived as dominated by Russia. I mean, the Russian GDP is more than 80% of the Eurasian Economic Union's GDP overall. And there's a certain disconnect with the Belt and Road. At the same time, and I mentioned it earlier, Russia and China appear to get along really well and are really keen on fostering this partnership. So they're trying to make it work somehow. They're trying not to create contradictions between the two projects, even though eventually there may be. The rest is a lot of speculation, and analysts like myself don't agree on that, as in how Chinese-Russian relations will develop over time. And this will determine absolutely how the Eurasian Economic Union can relate to the Belt and Road. Many say that Russia is a European power in the end and will have to turn towards Europe, more so than being China's junior partner, if you will. So there's tensions inherent to that. But I think in the medium term, we will see these powers doing their utmost to combine these two visions some way or else.
Yes.
We see that they may have allies, like Kazakhstan's President Tokayev is very adamant on not turning the Eurasian Economic Union into a political project in the first place. So there may be allies on that. But this dynamic will be very critical to watch indeed, particularly the specifics of it.
Right, and just, you did mention Belarus, and you know, it's obviously an ongoing issue, but in Belarus, I would say it's one point where the Eurasian Economic Union and the Belt and Road Initiative meet, in a sense, in the Great Stone Park, right, which you had on your map, and that. So there are definitely points of intersection that I imagine will have ramifications for both initiatives. Well, thank you very much for that. Given our time constraints, we unfortunately have to move on. Thank you, Benno, but I will be monitoring the questions in the Q&A function. Now we are delighted to have with us Tony Moret, who is the deputy head of, of Division of Europe and Central Asia and Bilateral Economic Relations of the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs. We often ask, how can Swiss companies benefit from this incredible BRI initiative? Hence, it makes a lot of sense for us to hear from Tony what the opportunities are for Swiss companies to leverage the opportunities of the Belt and Road Initiative. So I hand the microphone to you, Tony.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Is my presentation? Oh, yes.
Good.
Thank you. So I'm very pleased to be with you for this fifth Silk Road Forum, organized jointly by the GCC and the SCCC, whom I thank for the dynamism they are showing in this very special year. I was asked, as Dorit said, to speak on behalf of SECO on how Swiss companies can leverage business opportunities of China's BRI, and therefore what the Swiss government can do to help them. My presentation will consist of 8 points. Please, the next slide. A short introduction, trade and investment situation with China and Eurasia. Second, the position of Switzerland towards the BRI. Third, I will talk about the MOU with China. Fourth, I will speak about the competence building platform. Then 5, the further support by the Swiss government. 6, a few hints for leveraging BRI opportunities. 7, I will mention official business meetings planned in 2020 and 2021 from SECO, and then conclude. So, next slide. I would remind you of Switzerland's trade and investment situation with the countries at the heart of China's BRI, which are the countries covered by the GCC, Eurasia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, Russia, the South Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan and Georgia, and the EU's eastern neighbors, Belarus, Moldova and Ukraine. On the current slide, you can see export and import figures from 2019. All trade figures I will present you do not include gold, as this would distort the relevant trade flows. Gold is usually simply refined in Switzerland and does not generate considerable added value. As you can see, the trade volume with China is outstanding. China is the third biggest trading partner with Switzerland after the European Union and the United States. Then comes Russia, the eastern neighbors, EU eastern neighbors, above all Ukraine, and then trade with Central Asia and the South Caucasus are still rather modest. Let's look at the trade flows over the past 10 years very shortly. Next slide. The trade flows with China have constantly been growing over the past decade, plus 115%, exports plus 89%, imports plus 145%. Next slide. With Russia, Switzerland has an important trade surplus. Russia is its 13th biggest trading partner. Exports to Russia have been rising, but imports have been decreasing, leaving the total trade virtually unchanged since 2010, only plus 0.5% of total trade. Next slide. With Belarus, Moldova and Ukraine combined, both Swiss exports and imports exhibited a growth over the past few years up to 2019. So an increase of total trade. Next slide. With Central Asia, Swiss exports did not demonstrate strong growth over the past 10 years. Kazakhstan is Switzerland's biggest trading partner in Central Asia, comprising around 60% of all Swiss exports and 99% of all Swiss imports from the region. Finally, next slide. South Caucasus, while Swiss imports declined drastically over the past 10 years, Swiss exports have been very low. Trade is on a low level still. Let's have a look at the investment. Next slide. So if we look at the Swiss investment situation at the end of 2018, this is last statistics that we have from the Swiss side, it comes as no surprise that China and Russia are in the lead. The surprise is perhaps that Russia is ahead of China in FDI, at least at the end of 2018. Next slide, please. Over the past 10 years, while the Swiss investments to Russia slumped in 2013, they recovered quickly to surpass those of China. Russia is the 11th and China the 12th biggest recipient country of Swiss FDI at the end of 2018. Next, so we can say that Russian investments in Russia have been multiplied by 4, and in China a little more than 3, but nearly 3.5, I would say. Next slide. Compared to Russia and China, the other regions seem to be relatively unpopular for Swiss FDI. However, Swiss investments to the three Eastern European countries, Belarus, Moldova, and Ukraine, showed a strong growth since 2016. Comparably, Swiss FDI in Central Asia and in South Caucasus are at still very low level, but the last 3 years investment has been on the rise. So I will come to point 2 after this bilateral view. The position of Switzerland towards the BRI. I would like to give you a broad overview of the evolution of Switzerland's efforts to get involved into the BRI. At first, I would like to remind you the position of the Swiss government towards the BRI, as decided in March 2018 by the Swiss Federal Council. Switzerland appreciates the BRI and aims to pursue a constructive dialogue with China. However, the Swiss government is well aware of both the chances and risks this encloses. On the one hand, the BRI could lead to promising economic opportunities through active project participation of Swiss companies, or at least through indirect benefits granted by the improved infrastructure from China over Central Asia to Europe. On the other hand, and equally important, an active participation enables Switzerland to shape and co-design the BRI up only to a certain extent. Of course, SECO and the Swiss government in general are well aware of the huge dimension of the vision of the BRI and the relatively modest size of Switzerland. However, the relationship and ties between Switzerland and China should not be underestimated. As President Xi Jinping puts it, the bilateral relations with Switzerland are characterized by mutual respect. This special position of Switzerland, which I will outline shortly afterwards, could enable us to promote the compliance and introduction of international standards within the BRI, and could lead to improved sustainability and economic viability of BRI projects. Next slide, please. This timeline depicts chosen events on the way towards the Memorandum of Understanding with China on developing third-party market cooperation, which was signed in April 2019. This cooperation is intended to be fostered in the scope of a BRI. On top of the timeline, the main agreements with China over the past few years are listed. As a first pillar of the bilateral economic relations, the signature of the free trade agreement between Switzerland and China of July 2013. That should be highlighted. Switzerland was the second European country after Iceland to sign an FTA with China. Still now, these two countries are the only ones in Europe to have an FTA with China. A further milestone was the establishment of the innovative strategic partnership between Switzerland and China in April 2016. This partnership aims at fostering the exchange and cooperation in various fields of innovation among companies, higher education and research institutions. Furthermore, the joint declaration also states that Switzerland and China intend to deepen their cooperation in the context of the BRI. The first round of this strategic dialogue was initiated in April 2018. After this declaration was signed, the bilateral exchanges on the highest level intensified somewhat. After the state visit of Xi Jinping in January 2017 in Switzerland, the president of the Swiss Confederation, Mrs. Doris Leuthard, attended the first BRI forum in Beijing in May 2017. In June 2018, the Federal Council then declared its intent to conclude a memorandum of understanding on the BRI with China on economic and financial matters. During the participation of the President of the Swiss Confederation, Uli Maurer, at the second BRI Forum in April 2019, the Memorandum of Understanding was signed. Next slide. Now I would like to comment on the main content of the MOU. The MOU aims to grant Swiss companies access to BRI projects. To achieve this, the MOU states that Switzerland and China endeavor to encourage Swiss and Chinese companies to jointly explore third-party market cooperations. Moreover, both countries should endeavor to facilitate the establishment of platforms, which finally should be led by the private sector. Article 2 of the MOU is of particular importance to Swiss companies. The main points are highlighted in yellow. First, it states that the bilateral cooperation between Switzerland and China should be enterprise-led. Second, the cooperation should be compliant with international practices and norms. And third, a level playing field should be granted, as, for example, through open and non-discriminatory procurement processes. This leads us to a first recommendation to the private sector. Please just the next click. If you can click on next, well, yes. So recommendation number 1, refer to the MOU and its content when dealing with Chinese business partners and officials. As this MOU is not legally binding, its principles might not always be followed, but it could nonetheless help to overcome administrative obstacles. I come to point 4, next slide. BRI Competence Building Platform. In the MOU, it is also noted that Switzerland and China aim to establish a Belt and Road Initiative competence building platform in Switzerland. This platform should serve high-level officials and executives from Switzerland, China, and third countries to build their capacity with respect to risk management, project governance, and international standards. Furthermore, it might be an ideal place to build business relationships. Let me briefly explain the previous progress in the establishment of this platform. After the bilateral MOU was signed in April 2019, a BRI roundtable with multiple Swiss stakeholders from the private and public sector was organized in September 2019 in Bern. This roundtable was very valuable to gather a variety of concerns and ideas with respect to the platform and the BRI in general. Then, in January 2020, a kickoff meeting for the competence building platform was held with high-level representatives from Switzerland and China. The Chinese delegation comprised of approximately 75 people, led by First Vice Premier Han Zheng, and on the Swiss side, 2 federal councillors attended this meeting, Mr. Guy Parmelin and Mr. Uli Maurer. The ministers were accompanied by representatives of the private sector of the 2 countries and China's state-owned enterprises. After a bilateral meeting unfortunately had to be cancelled in February 2020 due to the corona pandemic, the exchange between China and Switzerland and preparatory work for the first competence building platform continued. It is hoped that the first BRI competence building platform could take place in 2021. However, because of the ongoing pandemic, the implementation of the first platform could be postponed. Next slide or click, yes. This comes to a second recommendation, which is use existing platforms and meetings and create your own to build business relationships. I come to the fifth point, further support by Swiss government. Besides the signing of agreements, the official exchange and the will to include the private sector into the dialogue, the Swiss government provides further support at the multilateral level to enable Swiss companies the participation in BRI projects. Switzerland is, for example, a party of the so-called Plurilateral Agreement on Government Procurement of the WTO. The parties of this agreement aim to establish open, fair, and transparent government procurement processes. Several potentially interesting BRI countries are leading accession negotiations to be part of this agreement. The following map depicts these countries in yellow: Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, China, and Georgia, as you can see. Furthermore, Switzerland is a member of the international financial institutions, IMF, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, EBRD. Within both, the Swiss government supports the implementation of international standards, which might help Swiss companies to get a grasp on some BRI projects. Also noteworthy is the fact that Switzerland presides and co-presides constituencies within the IMF, World Bank, and the EBRD. Within those constituencies are several countries of Central Asia, as you know. This helps to maintain official dialogues with those countries. For company representatives, and this is a further recommendation, if you can click on the next slide. It could be clicking, it could be particularly useful to maintain, this is next one, yes. It could be particularly useful to maintain good contacts with members of consortia which regularly bid for BRI projects of IFEs. This roots in the fact that members of the respective consortia did not change often in the past. Next slide, please. No, and excuse me, slide number 7. Yes, next slide, please. Bilateral support. No, further one. Slide number 17. Yes, this one. The Swiss government, as most of you know, also maintains close economic relationship with countries involved in the BRI on a bilateral level. Especially noteworthy are the so-called Joint Economic Commissions. These are official bilateral meetings from the SECO with partner countries on a regular basis, some of them represented by high-ranking officials at the minister level. During these meetings, problems and concerns of Swiss companies with respect to the partner country can be addressed. Representatives of the Swiss private sector, such as Economy Suisse, Swissmem, Science Industries, the GCC, the SCCC, are part of the official delegation to raise issues of interest. Depending on the country, participation is also open to individual Swiss companies that have an important bilateral interest or wish to develop their business in the partner country. So if you have any problems, issues that you would like to see raised at the Joint Economic Commission, you can report them to SECO, to my division, or to the division of my colleague, Mrs. Fabienne Wassermann, who is responsible for China and Asia. In the map, our partner countries with which we hold regular Joint Economic Commission are marked in green. As you can see, Russia, Kazakhstan, China, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Ukraine, Belarus, and Azerbaijan, and Moldova. Next slide. Besides support and efforts on a multilateral level and within the scope of official bilateral meetings or business missions, the Swiss government also provides local support to Swiss companies interested in conducting business in certain countries. On the one hand, this involves support by Swiss business hubs and embassy personnel located in countries in which BRI projects are implemented or planned. These government representatives could, for example, help organizing meetings or even establish contacts with locals. In China, the Swiss Business Hub in Beijing could be of help. For matters related to Kazakhstan and Tajikistan, the trade point in Nur-Sultan would be the recommended point of contact. For the other countries, the respective Swiss embassies. Any obstacles which occur while conducting business related to BRI could also be addressed to the Bilateral Economic Relations Department at SECO in Bern. My colleagues and I are always happy to help and interested in knowing about possible difficulties which the Swiss private sector encounters while trying to engage in the BRI. Therefore, we highly recommend you to get in touch with Swiss officials to seek diplomatic, technical, and network support. Next click. Now, this is recommendation number 4. I come to point number 6, further hints for leveraging BRI opportunities. But first, it is vital to offer unique goods or services for which there exists no relevant Chinese competitors. As Xi Jinping during his meetings with Swiss delegations mentioned, Switzerland especially possesses expertise in innovation and in the financial sector. Therefore, to maximize chances to participating in a BRI project, you must be able to offer products or services that have little or no competition from Chinese companies and companies from a third-party market. Besides that, as a survey from companies from the European Union has shown, a strong local network and long-term relationships are also key for successful participation. EU companies were particularly successful if they ever had a close relationship with Chinese companies, especially the large 20 to 30 Chinese EPC contractors involved in the BRI or a long-term market presence in China or a BRI third market country. This comes to the two recommendation number 5 and 6 that you can see. Try to detect the demand and a local network. And I finally come to mention what is planned, if we can plan those days, official business meetings in 2020 and 2021. This year, we will have at the end of this year in Bern, the Joint Economic Commission with Russia, that we hope can be physically organized in Bern. Moldova on 16 December, which will be by video conference. And in 2021, we will have the Joint Economic Commissions, maybe with Azerbaijan, Belarus by video conference, China, which should have been organized this year, but had to be postponed due to the pandemic, that should take place in Bern. Kazakhstan in Nur Sultan, maybe Kyrgyzstan in Bern, Tajikistan in Dushanbe, Ukraine and Uzbekistan in Bern. The stars mean one star is the Joint Economic Commission takes place every year, 2 stars every 2 years, and 3 stars every 3 to 4 years. That brings me to the conclusion. I would like to sum up the 6 recommendations. First, try to detect the demand for own expertise or products which do not have local competition. The second, the importance of a local network and long-term relationships. The third is use existing platforms and meetings and create your own platforms to build business relationships. For these recommendations, the GCC and the CCC are of great help. And they organize already meetings for us. 4, try to establish contacts with China's members of consortia previously involved in projects of development banks. 5, get in touch with CIS officials. And 6, refer to the MOU and its content when dealing with China's business partners and officials. Finally, I would like to conclude by reminding you that in accordance with Switzerland's liberal economic policy, it's up to the private sector and therefore to Swiss companies to take the initiative and not the state, which is of course there to help and assist you. And next and final slide, I thank you for your attention. Spasiba za vнимание. And for Mandarin, I'm not yet able to read and to speak Chinese, so I let you read the Mandarin, which is written. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tony, for a very, very useful listing of recommendations and also an instrumentarium for Swiss companies, Swiss companies to really leverage what the Swiss government has to offer. Much appreciated. In my opening statement, I mentioned that because of COVID-19, there could be an impact on traditional supply chains and logistics. And we have with us today a JCC member, Nicholas Kohler, who's Regional Managing Director, Middle East, Central Asia of M&M Milica and Mook International Holding AG. Nicolas has many, many years of experience in the region, and he's going to give us his assessment on changes in global supply chains and logistics operations. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dorit. So welcome everybody, and I would like to give you a short overview or overlook what is right now for the moment happening in logistics along and especially in the Belt and Road Initiative link, and especially also along the Silk Road. So right now for the moment, first of all, what is the trade situation from Europe, from China to Europe for the moment? So Chinese economy, we have to remember, already decreased at the beginning of 2020, and the European economy decreased in March, April 2020. So what has happened is that China started with
Sorry to interrupt. We're not seeing your presentation.
Just a moment. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Perfect, perfect.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. So the Chinese economy decreased already at the beginning of 2020, and the European economy decreased in March and April 2020 with a sudden went down. We have to understand that China started to increase with its exports already again when Europe began to went down. Also, we have to understand that the train connection, which is in place since many years, it already started to replace the air freight, because the less flight connections meant that there was a reduced availability of air freight capacity from China to Europe. In March and in April, on the train connection, on the train link, there have been very little volumes, and they started dramatically in May 2020. And we have to understand that up till now, the year-on-year volume from China to Europe has increased by 36%. So we see that there is much more cargo, which is now running on the going by rail from China to Europe. Our expectation is that the boom will not continue for entire 2020, but our expectation is that the train figures will be about the same in 2020 than in 2019. What is the recent development and what is our expectation? So we remember that there was the Chinese decision that subsidies will be reduced. So they have decided, because for the moment the trains are still subsidized by the Chinese government, and there is a clear decision that they will reduce it down to 30% in 2020. They will go down for another 10% or 20% in 2021. And we have to understand that this currently did not affect the current situation, and it could have been absorbed. How could it have been absorbed? It is, first of all, that the railways have reduced the freight rates from China to Europe. Second of all, we have to understand that there is an optimization of the trains. So right now, for the moment, 3 Chinese trains mean 2 CIS trains. So we have a higher utilization of the trains on the CIS route. And we have got shorter distances, especially more and more trains from China are running to Russia and to Central Asia, and less trains are running to Europe. Of course, that means that right now, for the moment, there's a strong competition for capacities, especially on the direction from China to Europe. What has happened in Central Asia and in Transcaucasia with the COVID-19 situation? So the first is that we have very different first reactions. So we understand that in March, when the situation occurred, the reactions have been very different. So we have everything between negating the city and denying the situation in some countries. So COVID-19 was something which happened abroad, and sudden and quick and rapid shutdowns. So everything in between took place. We also had to understand that especially if you try to have an understanding from Europe, no governmental support for companies took place or is taking place, except some similar activities. For example, we see in Kazakhstan, where they are giving loans for companies who are suffering from the COVID-19 situation. We also have a quick and rushed shutdown of the borders between the countries. And only after a certain period of time, they understood that if they shut down the borders and if they do not let the cargo move, also the economy will turn down and it will be a more dramatic situation. But to give an understanding, we had a similar situation in Europe. Also in Europe, single countries shutting down the borders immediately. trying to prevent their population from the COVID-19 situation. And later on, they understood that if they are shutting down the borders, if they do not let the cargo move, they will bring to they will not only hit the economy, they will bring the economy to a standstill. What especially has been hit in full is the air freight, because we have to understand that most of the air freight volumes, especially with Central Asia, are transported with passengers aircraft, and that there is no flight connection with these countries, the air freight has been hit in full. If we take a look at some single countries, so we had in Kazakhstan, we had 2 lockdowns, the first mid of March till mid of May, and the second one started beginning of July. Also, we had to understand that the Kazakh tenge was devaluating by approximately 20%, which was leading to a significant reduction of the buying power of the population. Understanding that Kazakhstan especially is a country exporting more or less oil and gas and importing nearly each and everything consumer product, it means that all imported products for the population increased the prices by approximately 20%. We have a significant reduction of in- and outbound flight connections by 95%. So only 5% of the air freight volume remained, especially for Kazakhstan, a difficult situation. And prices for air freight went up by 2 or 3 times. Truck and rail connections are working, but with delay. Drivers are put in quarantine. Borders are temporarily closed. So it is quite a difficult situation in the logistics with Kazakhstan. But there are also things which turns up, which means that the current situation is an impulse for internal production in Kazakhstan and a reflection on national production from Kazakhstan. So if you're talking with the people in Kazakhstan, they say, look, right now, for the moment, we understand that there is also products which are coming from Kazakhstan, and we are producing them, and we can take advantage of them. We are operating in Kazakhstan also a Courier Express and Parcel company, and there we register a boom. There's a full boom of the e-commerce now in Kazakhstan. Especially customers are also asking for new services, for example, contact-free handovers, and the internet shopping is really going up. And it's interesting that already in August on the parcel market, we have been on the same figures like in January and February 2020, which means that the economy there has really turned. We understand that this trend, especially in Kazakhstan, will continue, because understanding that we have the 9th largest country of the world with a population of about only 17 million people, the trend for the e-commerce in Kazakhstan for sure will go on. Also understanding that Kazakh people, if you compare with other countries in Central Asia, still have got a quite significant higher buying power than in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, or Kyrgyzstan, or Turkmenistan. What has happened in Uzbekistan? We had a long lockdown in Uzbekistan. The borders with Turkmenistan have been closed, so it was not able to access Uzbekistan via Turkmenistan again. We also understand that the government decided that they will go for the health industry. So international projects and services went for a stop, and everything had to concentrate on the health industry. So a significant project, for example, like the new city in Tashkent, for the moment the volumes are significantly reduced because everything is going for the health industry. Flight connections are suspended, and the reduction of the flight capacity means higher rates for air freight also in Uzbekistan. Imports for goods for the daily use have also decreased. So we understand that right now, for the moment, the business has changed quite a lot. In Tajikistan, the freight import, if trusting the official figures, went down by 20%. So right now, for the moment, the volume is significantly reduced. We have extended lead times due to the fumigations at the borders, checks of drivers, and other measurements. That for sure led to a sharp rise of costs and flights are still suspended with Tajikistan. The country which is most difficult to enter logistics-wise for the moment is Turkmenistan, because they had a quarantine starting by mid of July, and it is announced to finish only by mid of October. Only supermarkets, pharmacies, courier services, communication shops for essential goods are in operation. We have to understand that the foreign specialists have left the country, so except especially in the oil and gas industry, plenty of engineers moved out of the country, which means that they came to a standstill. That for the moment there are only 2 truck borders are open, one with Azerbaijan, the other with Kazakhstan. This is the ferry from Baku to Turkmenbashi and the border at Kefarab. And we have got an extended waiting time there with about 10 to 15 days in addition. Trailers need to be changed, so they are changed on the ferry from Baku to Turkmenbashi or in Farab, and only Turkmen tractors are allowed to pull the trailers inside Kazakhstan. Absolutely no flight connection, no passenger, no cargo, only rare charter flights on the request of the government are announced till the 15th of October. So right now, for the moment, we are operating Turkmenistan mainly with containers and mainly with lift possibilities on the road. In Azerbaijan, after a strong lockdown, we understand that now the situation is getting better. Cargos can move and social life has again started by mid of August. Elementary schools are open, universities are still closed, and malls and big shopping centers are also closed. And it is now, since beginning of September, possible to travel from Baku outside to the regions. Georgia, also there, a quick and sudden lockdown. Georgia has been one of the very good examples to fight against COVID-19. But also everything has got its price, and the import and export volumes, by our information, have decreased by 50%. No flight connections there, and what is also having an impact on the situation in Georgia is the uprising elections, which have an effect on the international trade. In the Ukraine, the GDP turned down by about 12%. Especially cargo from China was difficult to bring to Ukraine. Air terminals are closed, and business is now starting to recover. But the rising of the cases in Kiev and in Odessa expect that the regional quarantine will take place. What is this as a summary to say for the entire region and for the logistics? The situation is very difficult to predict and can change daily. So we are checking for each and every request, especially how to go there. The good thing is that the governments mostly understood that the cargo needs to flow, and that the closure of the border, with a few exceptions, is not a term anymore. Because if we close the borders, if we stop the cargo, then we really will bring the industry and the flow of the goods to a standstill. Flight connections are significantly reduced, which leads to longer lead times and extremely higher prices. We understood that most of the international projects are stopped because of the visa regulations for the specialists from other countries. We also understand that the purchasing power of the population has decreased, and especially the supplies for goods for the daily use went down. Governmental support, and this is something which is quite difficult to understand for somebody living in Switzerland. The governmental support is something between very little and nothing. And we have to understand that most of less it's the burden of the companies and the burden of the people to overcome the situation. Central Asia and Transcaucasia for us is a good example that an economic crisis is hitting the emerging markets much more than the mature markets, especially when we take a look at the social security systems. And it also has shown that governments sometimes wait very long to take measurements, and then they do it very suddenly and very strong. What we are also missing is we are also missing regional coordination. One country is doing this, the other country is doing that. For the moment, we are missing that. As an expectation, we understand that this is something what we also feel, what we heard before. China is moving on and filling the gap. So more and more we understand that the role of China will become stronger and stronger in Central Asia and in Transcaucasia. For the moment, everybody is expecting and fearing that no further lockdown will take place, and the local markets can now recover step by step. We also understand that this brought in that countries the digitalization for a big move, and everything what we say about the logistics is if there will be a second wave, when it will come and how strong it will be. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nikolaus. That was a very, how should I say, very broad and exhaustive depiction of what is happening in the region. A quick question to you, and that is, do you think that there's going to be some fundamental and lasting change in the in supply chain, in the whole supply chain framework? Do you think that countries are going to change how they operate companies based on what the experience of COVID-19 has been?
I think that in Kazakhstan, for example, certainly the boom of the e-commerce and the change of the logistics system, this will remain. So for the moment, right now, for the moment, I expect that this is going to stay in Kazakhstan. In Uzbekistan, I think the purchasing power of the people is not big enough or not high enough that they can make use of internet services, and also the internet connection right now for the moment is not strong enough. The other three markets, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, I think that they are too little that you can talk about it. If you talk about international connections and international supplies, I think that we will come back to the old system. The old system means that access by air freight, access by intermodal business, and access by truck. I do not think that logistics, if everything will come to the old situation, that there will be a significant change for international logistics with Central Asia, with Transcaucasia.
Thank you very much for that. You touch on two of the key markets for our Chamber of Commerce and in the region, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. And now what we will do is zoom in to each of those markets respectively and hear what they are doing in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative. We will begin with Uzbekistan, with Oybek Shaykhov, who's the Secretary General of EuroUZ, a partner of the Joint Chamber of Commerce. EuroUZ stands for Europe Uzbekistan Association for Business Cooperation, and we have an excellent cooperation with Oybek and his organization. He has been very helpful today as well with the technical underpinnings of this webinar, for which I'm deeply grateful. Uzbekistan is doing a lot to develop itself in terms of infrastructure and logistics. President Mirziyoyev just made a statement recently at the UN, the 75th UN General Assembly, about plans coming up. And so there is a lot that is going to happen soon. So we're excited to hear what Oybek has to tell us on this subject. The mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. It's a pleasure to speak on such a distinguished panel, and it's indeed a great pleasure to be part of this important event. I will share my presentation. There we go. So I am just a brief introduction. I'm the Secretary General indeed of the Europe-Uzbekistan Association for Economic Cooperation. We are established in 2019, based in Brussels and Tashkent, and our mission is to support enhancing information awareness and project development capabilities for the European companies in Uzbekistan. And of course, our vision is a tangible contribution to the overall strengthening of economic partnership between Europe and Uzbekistan. although we are based in Brussels, we don't only cover the EU, we cover all countries of Europe. Also, we have a brief mention that we have Uzbekistan Intelligence Report, which is a newsletter type information which about 3,000 company organizations and governments all over the world today follow, and you can see that on our website. So Uzbekistan has experienced a lot of change in the last several years. Of course, 2016 became a milestone, a start of a new period in Uzbekistan, where a new president was elected, and that's when really the reforms started. 2016, Uzbekistan was very much a closed economy, which had a lot of limitations on trade, and new government started to immediately focus on very strong integration into global supply chains, into access to global markets, and of course, very importantly, and this is again outlined in the president's speech to the UN just a few days ago, closer regional cooperation. When you talk about trade, Uzbekistan focuses on joining, now Uzbekistan will join the Eurasian Economic Union as an observer. Of course, we are focusing on joining the World Trade Organization, one of very few countries in the world who still are not part of that. And this year, we are going to sign the GSP Plus agreement with the EU, which will actually grant quite substantial advantages to a number of Uzbek products. I think 4,500 additional Uzbek made products would have easier access to the European market. Added value products, textile industry and agro industry, you have the most evident situation where Uzbekistan today reverses. It used to, for many years, of course, was one of the big exports of cotton. Uzbekistan this year is focusing on the added value products and agro industry as well, access to the markets well beyond what the traditional markets for the Uzbek fruits and vegetables were, like Russia. We saw last year, I think, Uzbek cherries in London markets, and we saw just now, I was reading before this webinar that the Uzbek tomatoes are for the first time actually on Berlin markets. So when you look at the COVID situation and the several, I will look more on the macroeconomic outlook first in order to zoom in into the logistics part. So when you look at the data which was presented actually by the Asian Development Bank just a few weeks ago, Uzbekistan still remains one of the few economies of the Central Asian region which is still expected to grow. Well, while Turkmenistan, of course, is a very closed market, and it is actually not mentioned in some of the IFI reports, outlooks on the market. ADB does mention Turkmenistan. Besides that, Uzbekistan is also going, it was revised a few times, but Uzbekistan is still expected to have a positive economic growth this year, according to IDB, the World Bank, and I think report, and the EBRD report is going to be updated in the coming weeks, and we will see what their projections are. But across the board, all the IFIs very active in Central Asia expect a very substantial rebound in 2021. And this is the latest data. Uzbekistan is expected to grow at 6.5% next year. When you look at general trade snapshot, what happened in Uzbekistan during this year, there was a substantial boost by oil. Of course, Uzbekistan is one of the biggest oil producers in the world, gold producers in the world. So the substantial increase in gold exports has actually amounted to 50% of total exports that Uzbekistan had during the first 2 quarters of this year. But what I want to focus right now is this figure. So you see services make up 11.3% of all the exports of Uzbekistan, third only after industrial goods and of course gold. Industrial goods, Uzbekistan exports quite a lot of machinery, mainly vehicles to Russia. We produce cars, but services sector, if you zoom in, actually 68.5% in the first 2 quarters was transportation services. And this is quite substantial when you look at the market, which is located where it is. So when you look at the external trade and looking from a different perspective in terms of who are the main partners of the country, of course, you see a reduction during this year of about 12.5% in general, in total trade that Uzbekistan had over the first 8 months of this year, but China remains the leading partner. And if you slightly zoom out and look at the regional context, of course, China remains the biggest partner for trade, not only for Uzbekistan, but actually for the entire Central Asian region. So when you look at the dynamics, and what I find interesting to look at the dynamics over the period of 10 years, you see that China has actually become a key player over this period, and the change what you see between 2007 and 2018, which is the latest data I had available before this, for the whole Central Asian region, you actually see that the jump is really substantial. When you look at this from the BRI perspective, of course, Uzbekistan is on the central corridor. This is not the perfect map, but I think that this is gives a good balance between a very detailed and very general map of the BRI. And then you see that Uzbekistan could be, and you zooming into this, BRI projects in Central Asia are about transit times and alternative routes. This year in June, a new China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan rail link was opened, which actually is not a full rail link where you still have goods going on the rail from China to Kyrgyzstan through the trucks on the road through Kyrgyzstan, and again by the rail to Uzbekistan. But still, even with that difficulty, this route is still shorter, faster, and about 20% cheaper for Uzbekistan to use as, for example, the usual route through Kazakhstan. So if you try, I will try to zoom in this a little bit. So Uzbekistan is, of course, geographically right in the middle of Central Asia. A lot of transit routes go through the Turkmenistan. Again, this is not the latest and the best map, but I find it the most appropriate for this, for the purposes of this event. Of course, one of the key transit routes through Central Asia from Turkmenistan running through Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and into China is the pipeline, which is supplying most of the gas today from Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan. If I think not all the gas from Turkmenistan, if you don't, not all, there is still Iran, but a substantial part of the gas from Central Asia to China. China is the main market. One of the key impacts we saw, of course, when in the first quarter, when the Chinese economy ground to a virtual halt for a period, the amount of gas sold by Uzbekistan to Turkmenistan collectively to China dropped substantially, and that created, of course, a very big impact on Uzbek economy. But Uzbekistan is today looking very importantly, not only through a prism of Central Asia as we traditionally see it in the region as the Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan countries, but actually trying, and this is a very important focus for the new Uzbek government, is to include Afghanistan into the mix and to play a very important role as a mediator and supporter of the Afghan peace process, looking at it through a prism of economic stability brings also political stability. Today, Uzbekistan is the main supplier, is one of the main suppliers. I do believe that it has could be the main supplier this year of the electricity to Afghanistan. And then Uzbek Railways is the company which is building a substantial portion of railways actually in Afghanistan. And this brings us to slightly more detailed overview. So Uzbekistan puts in its policy of external relations today in a global context. Uzbekistan puts a major focus on regional integration. That was made possible with the new president coming in. He had probably a different view. The previous president was much more conservative in that regard. So the borders with Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan were there were a lot of questions, a lot of minor disputes on the borders for many years, and with the change in Uzbekistan, that allowed the countries to actually move into the process of very close cooperation also on the border questions, which has seen substantial improvement. In terms of BRI projects, Uzbekistan does not brand BRI projects as BRI often, but welcomes, of course, the financing from China. When you look at something beyond the map, when you look at the air transport routes as well, Uzbekistan puts substantial focus on the development of the air transport routes. And Navoy, one of the biggest airports, which was specifically constructed for cargo purposes, is today serving as a hub between Europe and Central Asia for a few big airlines. We see today DHL actually land in Tashkent for refueling, but we also see Turkish Airlines on route to Hong Kong today using Navoy as one of the main hubs. A lot of private aviation goes through Navoy. We are trying to bring Cargolux into Uzbekistan as well, but of course Uzbekistan's challenges on the cost of fuel remain one of the key challenges for most airlines, because of course today it's not only geographic advantage but also the cost structure. Uzbekistan has very little of own oil, mainly relies on imports, and that creates difficulty, of course, for the cost of fuel. But when you look at the infrastructure, Uzbekistan is fairly well developed in terms of rail, but roads require substantial improvement. You see here the data from OECD report, which was produced last year, in order to match, maintain network performance. The current capacity of the infrastructure will need to increase dramatically, also in Kazakhstan, also in neighboring countries, but roads, particularly in Uzbekistan, will have to be, the road infrastructure will have to be improved by almost 500% in order to maintain the network performance by 2030, and by over 1,000% by 2050. For the rail, it's 13% and 500% by 2050, respectively. When you look at the transport strategy that Uzbekistan has produced last year, the general purpose roads, Uzbekistan plans to construct almost, these are the numbers, I don't have to read them, but of course, new highways are also playing a very important role in the Uzbekistan strategy, because the road infrastructure indeed needs to improve. There are still no paid highways, and Uzbekistan is moving into the PPP projects for the first time during these years, sponsored by EBRD, for example, and the World Bank. This is Tashkent-Samarkand road, new airport terminal, Samarkand, business aviation airport in Tashkent. This is some of the projects that Uzbekistan is investing. A lot of it is actually coming, being financed by also Chinese Exim Bank, but also by different institutions based in China. Focus on becoming a transit point, of course, on the Europe and China air route was mentioned by the president several times as a key priority for the Uzbek Ministry of Transport. And of course, Afghanistan, again, 650-kilometer Mazar-e Sharif Herat railway project in Afghanistan is on the way, And this is something that Uzbekistan sees really as a crucial gateway for further connecting not only Afghanistan to Central Asia, but also, of course, gaining access to the southern ports of Pakistan, because today still Bandar Abbas remains one of the key ports which is used by for maritime transit to Uzbekistan. And Uzbekistan being the double landlocked country, one of only two such countries in the world, is indeed putting substantial effort on diversification of the rail links. But at the same time, in terms of BRI, it's very important to note that Uzbekistan really tries to not position itself, not to expose itself too much to Chinese loans, as opposed to possibly some neighboring countries. And this is the summary. So I tried to be very general, but thorough, so I can I can really focus on the main points that could be interesting to this audience. Thank you very much, and I hope that was useful. Dorit, back to you. Your microphone is off. Your microphone is off.
Thank you very much, Oybek. That was as informative as ever, and it's very exciting to see all the projects that are in the pipeline for Uzbekistan. I was wondering if anybody in the audience has a question, and if not, I will immediately cede the floor to another extremely important country in our portfolio and in the new Silk Road, and that is Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is known traditionally as the buckle in the belt. And we are interested to hear about the BRI projects underway in Kazakhstan in 2020 and beyond. And it is with great honor to introduce to you His Excellency Ambassador Bolat Nurgaliev, who is a member of the board of the Foreign Policy Research Institute of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Kazakhstan, who will inform us on these matters. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Do you hear me? No. Thank you, Frau Probst. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm thankful for this opportunity to present my views on the subject of today's webinar, since it is of great relevance for assessing geopolitical and geo-economic consequences of the pandemic for the implementation of the development plans of Kazakhstan and our Central Asian neighbors. Among the points I would like to make, the foremost is that irrespective of how long it will take for the global economy in general and the regional economies in particular to recover fully from the impact of the COVID-19. And at this juncture, it is evident that we do not possess sufficient data for educated guess on the relevance, significance, and potential of the Belt and Road Initiative are not going to be affected. Though some infrastructure projects have to be rescheduled, the strategic initiatives will not be rolled down or reduced in scale. And this is going to prove beyond doubt that the BRI is not some master plan for political expediency, as some people in the West sometimes allege, but a timely idea of pressing economic necessity and grand vision, which is shared by willing participants. Here in Kazakhstan, we are fully determined to honor our commitments under the MOU signed between the governments of Kazakhstan and the People's Republic of China on joint activities in synchronization of our Nurli-Zhol new economic policy and the Chinese construction of the economic belt of the Silk Road. As is known, this MOU is aimed at upgrading comprehensive interlinkage of infrastructure of our two countries, advancement of trade and investment, as well as strengthening cooperation in transportation, industries, energy, agricultural sector, finances, etc. At the summit in Beijing last September, President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev confirmed his determination to continue strategic partnership, to enhance it as beneficial for sustainable development of Kazakhstan. In other words, commenting on the point made by Mr. Zog, it is definitely not about the economic growth only of China, but about economic growth of the countries of Central Asia as well. For a landlocked country, of special significance are projects related to transportation infrastructure. Among them are transportation corridors, China, Kazakhstan, Russia, Western Europe, China, Kazakhstan, South Caucasus, Turkey, Europe, China, Kazakhstan, Western Asia. Of course, plus to that is improvement of transportation infrastructure on the route from northwestern region up to southeastern coast of China, plus enhanced traffic capacity of our highways and railways. All these are designed to build eventually an economic corridor named New Eurasian Continental Bridge. We attach great importance to speeding regular cargo trains movement from China to Europe and Central Asia, including container traffic on routes for China, Kazakhstan, Central Asia, China, Kazakhstan, Europe, China, Kazakhstan, Persian Gulf. Part of it is functioning quite successfully. Here is an example. On the 7th of August 2020, National Railways company's subsidiary KTZ Express sent from a Chinese railway station UC 50 40-feet containers with consumer goods across Alashankou-Dostik all the way to Sergeli in Uzbekistan, and it took only 9 days. Similar examples can be offered about industrial goods, which were delivered by KTZ Express through Turkmenistan to China in 10 days. And these examples are plenty. These are, in my mind, manifestations that life goes on, and we do not experience major disruptions in this field, though, admittedly, the general impact of the pandemic on the intensity of trade turnover, as was evident from the presentation of Mr. Shaikhov, is bitterly felt. At the same time, as is usual in critical situations, new venues for cooperation are emerging. There are sources claiming that because of COVID, digitalization of the world economy speeded many times. Some claim that maybe up to 10 times. And Central Asia, of course, doesn't want to be left behind in this process, and therefore is eager to take part in large-scale information and telecommunication projects. I would like to draw your attention to the start of construction of a fiber optical cable line connecting Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan across the Caspian Sea. The Trans-Caspian Fiber Optic, that is called NCFO. It's a joint venture of Azertelecom and Kazakh Transtelecom and Kaztranscom. By the end of next year, 2021, this NFCO will be functioning and delivering data with a speed of 4 to 6 terabytes a second. This NFCO will be able to affect the business environment in the whole Caspian region and beyond, improving the access to digital services to nearly 2 billion people living in the Caucasus, Central and South Asia, and the Middle East. Let us not forget that Kazakhstan is a gateway for data supply to the entire Central Asian region, as well as a transit route for data traffic from Russia to China and from there to the rest of Asia. In this way, this fiber optic project is totally complementary to the BRI aims and principles. Right now, Chinese internet companies are actively involved in the former Soviet Union republics and the European countries, and hence are in need of additional sources of data trafficking, as well as broadening of transit capacities of existing communication channels. In a way, this project is a viable alternative to current over-reliance on fiber optic lines laid on the sea bottom. Diversification is always preferable, that's understandable. And we believe that the European countries should take a close look at this project in the light of its perspective in facilitating mutually beneficial technological cooperation of Europe with China and the countries of Central Asia and Caucasus. About missed opportunities mentioned by Mr. Kohle to maintain regional coordination. There is a recognition of the need for that, and so the proof is that last July there was a video conference, the first ministerial Central Asia China, with the participation of foreign ministers Liu Berdi, Wang Yi, Aydarberkov, Muhyiddin, Meredov, and Kamilov. It was a manifestation of further strengthening of the regional cooperation since 2018, making our dialogue more and more practically oriented. And note also the participation of Turkmenistan, Vice Prime Minister Meredov, who traditionally were in the past shying away from institutionalized platforms. Positive impact of the BRI in turning our regional interaction into a joint venture was evident through the deliberations of this ministerial. The role of Central Asian states in the continental trade is increasing, irrespective of international quarantine because of the COVID, irrespective of slowing down of cargo traffic and closing borders by many states, irrespective of all these difficulties and limitations, China-Europe transit of cargo through the Central Asian transport corridors increased by 54% in the 6 months of 2020. Expectations are that the final results for the regional trade by the end of the year will also not be disappointing. The participants of the ministerial were encouraged by Chinese commitment to facilitate creation of express corridor for unhindered cargo deliveries with the Central Asian states. One remarkable feature of the ministerial was a stress on high-tech digital partnership in such fields as e-commerce, smart cities, artificial intelligence, big data. Naturally, prominent among the topics discussed at the ministerial was cooperation between China and Central Asia in fighting against coronavirus infection, and specific joint research in pharmaceutical field was agreed upon. Allow me to conclude by stressing that Central Asian states cooperation with China is beneficial to the European countries and to the world community at large. We invite all of you, especially the Swiss participants of the webinar, to join us in the far-reaching and justifiably ambitious projects in energy, trade, telecommunications, and infrastructure once things are back to normal. Meanwhile, stay well and be safe. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Nurgaliev, for that very concise but very informative presentation. We very much look forward to having things back to normal and for picking up where we left off with Swiss companies investing in the region, and more than ever. We look forward to seeing a boost in activity from 2021 forward.
Yes.
So thank you very much for that. Well, we're a little behind schedule, but we have arrived at the final presentation of today's webinar, and that is a key topic, which is the environment. The environment impacts all of us, and it has a very important place also in the Belt and Road in Central Asia. Here to talk about the greening of the BRI in Central Asia is another JCC member, Otto Simonet, who is director of the ZOE Environment Network. Otto, the floor is yours. Where is Otto? Oh. Otto, can you turn on your microphone, please? I think you are on mute. Otto, if you can turn your microphone on, that would be excellent.
Sorry about this glitch. ZOE Environment Network is a Geneva-based environmental organization, and we aim at bridging the gap between science and policy making, between environment and society.
Otto, there you go. That's perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
You're all set now. Thank you.
Now, greening the Belt and Road is, of course, a very difficult topic, I would say, and it has only come up recently. When Mr. Pavlicek said 5 years ago nobody knew about the Belt and Road, I would say 2-3 years ago nobody knew about greening the Belt and Road, and we are active, very much active in Central Asia, in Eastern Europe, and we were then approached by the Swiss government. And that's like our cooperation between us, the Federal Office of the Environment of Switzerland, and the UN to show and highlight issues of the Belt and Road and how this can be green. Why are we doing this? I think the very simple thing is it's there. It's very, very large and rapid infrastructure development, but it's also a lot of other developments. And like the ambassador just now highlighted, it's also digital development, which per se could be an opportunity for green development. One interesting aspect is nobody declines or denies greening. Everybody says we want to be green. China, the countries of Central Asia and Mongolia and the international community, they all say we will build this in the best possible way. There is a huge opportunity. And the third pillar, the safeguards are also there. There is national legislation, there are international agreements, financial instruments and voluntary compliance. So actually everything looks very fine, at least in declaration. Trying to okay. We have heard about many projects. Khimchik Tunnel in Uzbekistan. I mean, this is linking Tashkent to the Fergana Valley. The longest tunnel in Central Asia. When we in Switzerland brag about our Gotthard, which is longer, Khimchik Tunnel was built much faster under a Belt and Road project. We have also maybe environmentally less sound Belt and Road projects. That's a thermal power plant in Dushanbe, Tajikistan. And of course, the international community, in particular the Coalition for Greening the Belt and Road, want to avoid China exporting polluting projects, and coal still is considered as polluting to Central Asia and other parts of the world. But the good news is, of course, green investments have been announced at last year's meeting of the Belt and Road, and also the need of transparency. Now, for whom are we doing these reports or these assessments? I think we want to address influencers, environmental policymakers in the receiving countries, in China, international organizations and donors. I think you are part of this audience. We also want to help the watchdogs. In particular, environmental NGOs in the region are usually very weak. And I think by providing good, neutral, science-based assessments, I think they have a foothold to get engaged. And we also want to preach to environmental ignorance. I mean, that's mainstreaming environmental issues, business, finance, investment, and industry. Now, we have heard this before. I think Belt and Road is not a single thing. It's a catch-all terms for investments, and it's all different. It has different elements. Some of them have nothing to do with the environment, but some of them, like large-scale infrastructure projects, have. Then the nature of the BRI investments can vary considerably, from engineering design, construction works, to resources for investment barter deals. So it's a whole heterogeneous thing, incarnation in Central Asia. And of course, there are significant differences, what we have also heard today, between the different countries of Central Asia and also Mongolia, which is part of our assessments. So in the assessments we did on Greening the Belt and Road in Central Asia, which was published last year, we analyzed more than 100 active projects in Central Asia. And you can see here the categorization. It's industry, energy, farming, and food. The speaker from Uzbekistan mentioned like exporting cherries to the Berlin, or no, tomatoes to Berlin and cherries to London. Mining, infrastructure, urban, and other projects. So there is a lot of projects where we analyzed their impact on the environment in a general way. And the same thing was done for Mongolia. I think Mongolia is one of the important corridors crossing Mongolia. And this is also addressing issues of China, Russia, Mongolia cooperation. This assessment hasn't been launched yet. There will be a launch event in Geneva this coming Thursday with the Embassy of Mongolia, outlining all the challenges of environment and environmental safeguards. Now, what are they? What are the existing safeguards? I think very important for the Swiss government and for the UN, who are also behind this work, is that we don't lose acquis, we don't lose environmental safeguards which exist, and we want them to be applied. In all the countries of the region, there are national laws regulating water, land use, emissions and waste. They're of course not always applied, and in particular with Belt and Road projects happening very, very rapidly, it's sometimes difficult to apply all these safeguards. There are the bank safeguards, industry standards, voluntary compliance is I think, provide, there's a whole instrumentarium for environmental protection. But what we want to make sure things are applied, that mistakes from the past are not repeated. There are a lot of regional and global conventions on transboundary environmental protection. Just to mention the most significant is like the climate change agreement, biodiversity agreement. These are global agreements, but then there are also regional agreements on environmental impacts and also on water cooperation, which are regulated, and all the countries participate in these. And what we also want to highlight, of course, are the Chinese green policies, which are very much unknown, but could on the long run have a large impact in the recipient countries. Now, in our assessment, we are in a way preachers. In a way, we want to show, okay, this Belt and Road is there, it's happening, but where are the flags? So we are publishing this kind of, that's just an example on transport and communication, where we want to highlight best practices and risks, because a lot of the interlocutors in the countries are not so much familiar with all these practices, and what I said before, at the speed these things happening, they're not always applied. And I think what we want to avoid are local grievances. We want to avoid hostilities which happen once in a while, and we just think the price invested in applying these safeguards is really worthwhile. And contrary to conventional wisdom, I think there are not so many delays usually when you apply them, but I think on the long run you have a better situation. Mongolia is probably not covered by your chamber, but I think this is our most recent work. And it's very impressive how some of these countries, I mean Kazakhstan as well, have very ambitious targets for 2030, for 2050. And I think we just want to help them to achieve them. And for this, I think the Belt and Road is an enormous opportunity. I mean, it's not just a risk, but it's also an opportunity. I want to just go through this very, very fast, but that's in a way very much unknown in the West, is the Chinese policies and guidelines. We are member of the Green Development Coalition of the Belt and Road. I mean, this is a forum to exchange best practices, to compare also instruments, outbound investment instruments existing in China, instruments existing by the banks, and then the legal instruments by the international organizations. There are really a lot of official regulations. Of course, these focus on minimal compliance, I mean, to obey host country rules. Stronger standards are now being developed by industrial association, setting higher benchmarks. These are voluntary standards, but they are enhanced and they're also enforced with measurable indicators. And then, of course, the strongest mechanisms under the China is really leading green finance development. And I think there is an enormous opportunities in all these instruments to really make the Belt and Road green and make it sustainable. Now, what are our conclusions? I think transparency is an absolute must. A lot of Belt and Road projects are not necessarily, I mean, they are of a very high importance to the recipient countries, so they're not always broadcasted like maybe other projects, or like projects by the World Bank or so. So we believe there can still be a lot of improvement in transparency. Monitor, apply relevant safeguards, and engage stakeholders. I think we also want to engage NGOs, local NGOs, and I think they should be treated by respect. In recent webinars we had with NGOs from Central Asia, they didn't know where they can address the Chinese drivers, where can they have an entry point, and for this the next component is very important. I think we want to, together with the UN and other players, we want to conduct training for Chinese SOEs, for other private sector entities, and for NGOs to learn about these safeguards. And then of course exchange, like what we're doing now, and within the International Coalition for Green Development on the Belt and Road is extremely important. I haven't spoken much about COVID. I have to say, for us, I think we have the same issues of not traveling and all these kind of things. I think for the environment, it provides an opportunity. I mean, the world has seen there are possibilities, and like the ambassador has also highlighted, digitalization has been boosted, which can per se be very green, but it's very hard to predict for us what the implications are. So thank you very much. From a picture from Urumqi, from a museum. This looks like it's very symbolical. It looks like how a greening the Belt and Road could look like, how applying safeguards could really bring a lot of benefits for everybody participating. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Otto. That was a very interesting presentation indeed. I'm very heartened to see that there are policies, there are regulations, there are indeed safeguards, many more than I had expected or knew about. My question to you is, in concrete terms, to what extent are these actually applied and on the ground? Are they working? Can you speak to that?
Yes, I mean, usually in our work, we work with the converted. I mean, our main partners are ministries of environment, who are maybe not the main drivers for development, but they have instruments to apply these safeguards. There are mechanisms in place. There is a gap between Chinese safeguards and the safeguards of the countries and the international community, because the Chinese side, I mean, everybody's asking for simplification, and I think a lot of businesses around the table of this webinar also want things to be simplified. But then on the other hand, if you talk about $100 million projects, why do you need simplification? Because you should have the resources to look at environmental impacts, to look at things you can do to minimize this impact. So I don't always buy the argument of simplification. I mean, it's not always needed. So I cannot give you a percentage where we are now. Maybe we are at 50-50, or it's very, very difficult to measure. But I think on the long run, also with the Sustainable Development Goals and everything, I think we will be able to provide better metrics in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for that. From the audience, I have a question from Lena Kaufmann, and this question goes to His Excellency Ambassador Nurgaliev. Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. Could you please say a bit more about the Chinese companies involved in the Trans-Caspian fiber optic project? Ambassador, we just need to unmute the microphone. This should be better now. We're having some difficulty hearing you.
That's mute.
Perfect, perfect. No? We can hear you now. Thank you very much.
As I said, this is right now, it is a joint venture between Azeri company, Azer Telecom, and two Kazakh telecom companies, Trans Telecom and Kaztranscom. So they are connecting the fiber optic line between Baku and Aktau across the Caspian Sea. The length is about 480 kilometers, but I don't remember if it is kilometers or nautic miles. But anyhow, as of now, this is an example, excellent example of a project which is inspired by the BRI, because the BRI, the implementation of the BRI and the boost it gives to economic development and development of different sectors of economy is such that there is a necessity for increased traffic of data. And in recognition of that, these companies decided to form. My expectation is that it has to be continued, and the line has to go further in order to increase the capacity. So that part will be over, like I said, by the end of 2021. And then there will be continuation, and that's why we are attracting the attention, suggesting that others have a closer look at that. And as of now, no specific Chinese companies are involved in the project. So what we anticipate that they will be using the services of provided by this project. But since these companies are quite financially sound, so they were able to arrange the financing on their own without attracting the loan within the framework of the BRI. But it doesn't exclude that in future there will be specific Chinese companies, of course.
Well, we will thank you, Ambassador, and we will do our best to promote that project. And I trust that my partner at the Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce will do the same, because it sounds really interesting and beneficial. Are there any more questions from the audience? I see another question has just come up. 1 second, please. Okay. Right. There are questions, technical questions regarding presentations or sharing of the video of this conference. I would be happy to do that as long as the speakers all agree and as long as the Swiss Chinese Chamber of Commerce agrees. We will do our best. And if you have any requests for any other presentations, please just send me an email or ask Beilun Wei and she will let me know. Well, we are pretty much within a little over time, but I want to thank all our esteemed speakers for the excellent presentations, very informative presentations today. And to our audience, for your patience in bearing with us. I apologize again for the technical glitch at the start of the webinar. As time goes on, I will also learn how to handle this digital world. Well, I encourage you to visit our website, Joint Chamber of Commerce. We organize lots of webinars on countries in the region and opportunities for Swiss companies. Everybody's welcome. And I would like to thank you all and also wish you a very good afternoon and stay healthy, stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.